Dr. Amelia Ross stood in the sterile hallway of Metropolitan General Hospital. Her surgical scrubs, still damp with sweat from the 12-hour operation she had just completed. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows under her tired eyes. But nothing could dim the fire of determination burning within her. She had saved another life today, but the irony was not lost on her that she couldn't save the one that mattered most. Her phone buzzed with another message from the billing department. The words blurred together as she read them for the 100th time. Her younger brother Tommy needed experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. The cost was astronomical. More money than she could ever hope to earn in her lifetime as a surgeon. Time was running out, and with each passing day, Tommy grew weaker. Amelia walked through the hospital corridors, her footsteps echoing in the quiet evening hours. She had always been the strong one, the sister who fixed everything, who made sacrifices so Tommy could pursue his dreams of becoming an artist. Now, at 25, he lay in a bed 3 floors above her. His body fighting a rare blood disorder that was slowly stealing his life away. She stopped at the large windows overlooking the city. The lights of downtown twinkled like stars, and among them, one building stood taller than the rest. Sterling Industries. The name alone sent a chill through her spine, not because of fear, but because of the man who owned it. It's the meeting that changed everything. Vincent Sterling was a name whispered in both reverence and fear throughout the business world. At 32, he had built an empire that spanned across multiple industries, from technology to real estate. His success was matched only by his reputation for being ruthlessly efficient and emotionally distant. Some called him brilliant, others called him heartless. Amelia was about to find out which was true. The next morning she found herself standing before the imposing glass tower that housed Sterling Industries. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the folder containing her proposal. She had spent the entire night crafting what she hoped would be an irresistible business opportunity, though deep down, she knew she was grasping at straws. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt endless. Each ding of the floors passing by matched the rapid beating of her heart. When the doors finally opened, she was greeted by a reception area that screamed wealth and power. Everything was pristine, from the marble floors to the abstract art adorning the walls. A sharply dressed assistant led her through a maze of corridors, until they reached a set of double doors made of dark mahogany. Beyond those doors waited Vincent Sterling, and with him, her last hope. The man behind the legend Vincent looked up from his desk as Amelia entered his office. The first thing that struck her was how different he looked from the photos she had seen in business magazines. Yes, he was undeniably handsome, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. But there was something else there. A weariness that spoke of battles fought and scars hidden beneath expensive suits. He gestured to the chair across from his desk without saying a word. Amelia sat down, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. But all she could focus on was the man studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Vincent finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. He had done his research on her, he said. Dr. Amelia Ross, one of the youngest cardiac surgeons. To ever work at Metropolitan General with a success rate that was nearly perfect. He knew about her brother, about the mounting medical bills, about her desperate situation. Amelia's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had come here thinking she was approaching him as an equal, offering him a business opportunity. Instead, she felt like a charity case being dissected by someone who held all the cards. She straightened her spine and began her pitch anyway. She spoke about the medical device she had been developing in her spare time, a revolutionary tool that could save countless lives in cardiac surgery. All she needed was funding and a laboratory to perfect the prototype. In return, he would own 50% of all profits. The proposal that shocked her, Vincent listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the smile of a man who had just found the solution to a problem he had been wrestling with. He told her he wasn't interested in her medical device. Her heart sank. But before despair could fully take hold, he continued. I had a different proposal, one that would solve both of their problems. Vincent needed a wife. Not for love, he made clear, but for business. His board of directors had been pressuring him to settle down, to present a more stable image to investors and partners. A confirmed bachelor was seen as unpredictable, unreliable. A married man with a family was trustworthy, grounded. He offered her a contract marriage. 1 year, he said. She would play the role of his devoted wife, attend social functions, charm his business associates. In return, he would pay for all of her brother's medical expenses, plus a substantial sum that would set her up for life. Amelia felt the world spinning around her. This was not what she had expected when she walked into his office. She stammered that she couldn't possibly accept such an arrangement. She was a doctor, not an actress. She had principles, standards. Vincent's expression didn't change. He told her to think about it. He gave her 24 hours to decide. She stood to leave, still in shock. He called her name. When she turned back, she saw something flicker in his eyes. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and she glimpsed the loneliness he kept hidden beneath his composed exterior. The weight of decision that night, Amelia sat by Tommy's bedside in the hospital. He was sleeping, his face pale but peaceful. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. She held his hand and felt how thin it had become. How fragile he seemed beneath the hospital blankets. Tommy had always been the dreamer in their family, the one who saw beauty where others saw only ordinary things. He painted pictures that captured emotions she couldn't put into words. He made her laugh when the weight of medical school threatened to crush her spirit. He was her anchor, her reminder of why she had chosen to become a doctor in the first place. Now, he was dying, and she was the only one who could save him. She thought about Vincent's proposal, a year of her life, in exchange for Tommy's future. It seemed like such a small price to pay, yet it felt enormous. She would be selling herself, compromising everything she believed about love and marriage, and authenticity. But as she watched her brother sleep, she realized that some sacrifices were worth making. Love wasn't always about grand gestures and fairy tale endings. Sometimes, love was about making the hard choices, about putting someone else's needs above your own desires. The contract signed in tears the next morning, Amelia returned to Sterling Industries. This time, she didn't hesitate at the elevator, or second-guess herself in the lobby. She had made her decision, and she would see it through. Vincent was waiting for her, a thick contract already prepared on his desk. He had been confident of her answer, she realized. He had known that when faced with losing the person she loved most, she would choose sacrifice over pride. The contract was thorough, covering every aspect of their arrangement. Public appearances, living arrangements, the timeline for their eventual divorce. It was cold and clinical, like a business merger rather than a marriage. There was one clause. That made her pause, though. Provision about children, should any result from their arrangement. Vincent noticed her hesitation and explained that, while their marriage would be primarily for show, they would need to present a convincing facade. That might require a level of intimacy that could lead to complications. The clause was simply a precaution, he assured her. Amelia signed her name at the bottom of the contract, her hand steady, despite the tears threatening to fall. As the ink dried, she felt as if she were signing away a piece of her soul. But when she thought of Tommy, of the chance he would have at a full life, she knew she had made the right choice. Vincent stood and extended his hand to her. As their fingers touched for the first time, Amelia felt a jolt of electricity pass. Between them, it was unexpected, unwelcome, and utterly terrifying. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. She couldn't afford to let emotions complicate things. But as Vincent's blue eyes met hers, she had the unsettling feeling that this contract would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The year ahead stretched before her like uncharted territory, filled with possibilities she didn't dare contemplate. The deal was done. In 1 year, she would be free to walk away with enough money to secure both her and Tommy's futures. All she had to do was pretend to love a man who had just proven he could buy anything he wanted, including a wife. Left his office that day, Amelia Ross had no idea that the hardest part wouldn't be pretending to love Vincent Sterling. The The hardest part would be pretending she didn't. 3 weeks had passed since Amelia signed the contract that changed everything. She now lived in Vincent's penthouse, a sprawling apartment that occupied the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. The space was beautiful, but cold, all clean lines and expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. Vincent had been true to his word about Tommy's treatment. Within days of signing their agreement, her brother had been transferred to the country's leading research hospital, where a team of specialists began the experimental therapy that offered his best chance at recovery. For the first time in months, Amelia felt the crushing weight of fear begin to lift from her shoulders, but living with Vincent proved to be more challenging than she had anticipated. He was a man of rigid routines and exacting standards. He left for the office at precisely 7:30 each morning and returned at 8:15 each evening. Spoke to her only when necessary, their conversations limited to scheduling and appearances. Yet despite his cold exterior, Amelia began to notice small things about him. The way he always asked about Tommy's progress, even though he tried to make it sound casual. While he ensured her favorite coffee was always stocked in the kitchen. The gentle way he helped her with her coat before they left for public events. The first crack in the armor, their first major public appearance together, was a charity gala for the children's hospital. Amelia wore a deep emerald dress that Vincent had selected for her, along with diamonds that probably cost more than most people's cars. As they entered the ballroom together, she felt every eye in the room turn toward them. Vincent played his part perfectly, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back as he introduced her to business associates and society figures. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple. But Amelia could feel the tension in his touch, the careful distance he maintained even as he smiled and played the devoted husband. It was during the dancing that something shifted between them. Vincent led her onto the dance floor for appearances, his movements smooth and confident. As they swayed to the music, Amelia found herself studying his face up close. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. His jaw was strong, but she could see the slight tension there, as if he were constantly fighting some internal battle. When he looked down at her, their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary. The carefully constructed walls between them seemed to waver, and Amelia felt that same electric current she had experienced when they first shook hands. Vincent's grip on her waist tightened almost imperceptibly, and she found herself leaning closer to him. The spell was broken when another couple bumped into them, apologizing profusely. Vincent immediately stepped back, the distance between them restored. But something had changed, and they both knew it. Behind closed doors that night. After they returned to the penthouse, the atmosphere between them was different. Vincent poured himself a glass of whiskey and offered her wine, which she declined. They sat in his living room, still dressed in their formal attire, the silence stretching between them. Vincent finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. He thanked her for her performance that evening, said she had been perfect. Amelia found herself studying his profile as he stared out at the city lights. Without the harsh lighting of his office or the crowd of people around them, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She asked him why he really needed a wife. Not the business reasons he had given her, but the real reason. Vincent was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to talk, his voice low and measured. He told her about the loneliness that had become his constant companion, how success had isolated him from genuine human connection. Everyone wanted something from him, whether it was money, influence, or access to his world. He had learned not to trust, not to hope for anything real. The marriage contract, he admitted, was as much about protecting himself as it was about satisfying his board. With Amelia, he knew exactly where he stood. There were no games, no hidden agendas. Just a business arrangement that would benefit them both. As he spoke, Amelia saw past the cold businessman facade to the man underneath. He was lonely, just as she had suspected. But more than that, he was afraid. Afraid of being hurt, afraid of being used, afraid of opening his heart only to have it broken. The night everything changed, 2 months into their arrangement. Something happened that neither of them had planned for. It was a Thursday evening, and Vincent had returned from the office later than usual. He looked exhausted, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His tie was loose, his hair mussed as if he had been running his hands through it. Amelia was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner. She had discovered that cooking helped her relax after long days at the hospital. When Vincent entered, she offered to make him a plate. He accepted, which surprised her. Usually, he retreated to his study with work that couldn't wait. They ate together in comfortable silence, and afterward, Vincent opened a bottle of wine. The conversation flowed more easily than it ever had before. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Amelia found herself laughing at his dry sense of humor, while Vincent seemed genuinely interested in her stories about medical school and her early days as a surgeon. As the evening wore on, they moved to the living room. The wine had relaxed, them both lowering the carefully maintained barriers between them. When Amelia shivered slightly in the air conditioning, Vincent moved closer to her on the couch, offering his warmth. The kiss happened so naturally that neither of them was prepared for its intensity. What started as a gentle brush of lips became something deeper, more desperate. All the tension and attraction they had been fighting erupted in that moment. Vincent's hands tangled in her hair while Amelia pressed closer to him, hungry for the connection she hadn't realized she craved. They made love that night with a passion that surprised them both. It wasn't the cold, calculated intimacy outlined in their contract. It was raw and real and beautiful. For those precious hours, they weren't businessmen and hired wife. They were simply two people who had found solace in each other's arms. Morning after, Amelia woke up alone in Vincent's bed, sunlight streaming through the massive windows. For a moment, she allowed herself to savor the memory of the night before. But reality came crashing back when she found the note on Vincent's pillow. The words were brief and businesslike, thanking her for a pleasant evening, but reminding her that their relationship remained contractual. He would be traveling for business for the next week and looked forward to resuming their normal arrangement upon his return. The clinical tone of the note felt like a slap in the face. Amelia had thought something real had happened between them, that maybe they had moved beyond the boundaries of their contract. But Vincent's message made it clear that to him, it had been nothing more than a physical release. She spent the day in a haze of hurt and confusion. Had she imagined the tenderness in his touch? The way he had whispered her name like a prayer? Had the connection she felt been one-sided all along? The secret she carries Vincent's business trip stretched into 2 weeks, during which Amelia threw herself into her work at the hospital. She performed 3 complex surgeries and volunteered for extra shifts. Anything to keep her mind off the man who had made love to her one night and dismissed her the next morning. It was during the 2nd week of his absence that Amelia began to suspect something was wrong. She was exhausted beyond her usual post-surgery fatigue, and the smell of coffee, which she normally loved, made her feel queasy. As a doctor, she recognized the signs, but as a woman, she was terrified to face the truth. The pregnancy test confirmed what she already knew. 2 pink lines that would change everything. She stared at the test for a long time, her hands trembling as the implications sank in. Their contract had provisions for this possibility, but seeing it in cold legal terms was different from facing the reality. She was carrying Vincent Sterling's child, conceived in a moment of genuine intimacy that he had reduced to a business transaction. The irony was not lost on her. She had agreed to a fake marriage and ended up with a very real pregnancy. The return Vincent returned from his business trip on a rainy Thursday evening. Amelia heard his key in the lock and felt her heart start racing. She had rehearsed what she would tell him 100 times. But now that the moment was here, all her carefully planned words deserted her. He looked good, she had to admit. The time away had restored his usual polished appearance. Edwin there. Eyes met across the living room. She saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe just awkwardness about how they had left things. Vincent set down his luggage and approached her carefully, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. He asked how she had been, how Tommy was. Progressing with his treatment, his voice was formal, distant, back to the tone he had used in their early days of marriage. Amelia wanted to scream at him, to demand an explanation for the note, for his coldness after the night they had shared. But she remained calm, answering his questions with the same polite distance he was showing her. It wasn't until later that evening, after they had shared an awkward dinner and Vincent had retreated to his study, that Amelia found the courage to knock on his door. When he called for her to enter, she found him behind his desk, surrounded by papers and looking every inch the successful businessman. She stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering her strength. Then, without preamble, she told him she was pregnant. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Changing everything once again, Vincent went very still, his pen frozen halfway through signing a document. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was unreadable. But Amelia thought she saw something flash in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or maybe something that looked almost like hope. The contract had just become infinitely more complicated. What came next? For 3 days after Amelia's announcement, Vincent said nothing about the pregnancy. He continued his routine as if nothing had changed, leaving for work precisely on time and returning each evening to retreat into his study. The only acknowledgement of her condition was the prenatal vitamins that appeared on the kitchen counter, and the appointment card for the city's best obstetrician. Amelia found his silence more painful than anger would have been. At least anger would have been a reaction, proof that the news affected him in some way. Instead, she felt like she was carrying this burden alone. Just as she had carried the weight of Tommy's illness before Vincent entered her life, she threw herself into her work at the hospital, performing surgery after surgery with mechanical precision. Her colleagues noticed the change in her. Where she had once been warm and encouraging with her patients, she now maintained professional distance. The spark that had made her such an exceptional doctor seemed to be dimming. It was Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of cardiology, who finally confronted her. Patricia was a mentor who had guided Amelia through her residency and early career. She cornered Amelia in the break room after a particularly difficult surgery. Patricia's words were direct and caring. She could see that something was wrong, that Amelia was going through the motions of being a surgeon without the passion that had always driven her. Whatever was happening in her personal life, Patricia warned, she couldn't let it compromise her ability to save lives. The conversation was a wake-up call for Amelia. She realized that in trying to protect herself from Vincent's indifference, she was losing the part of herself that mattered most. She was a healer, someone who fought for life and hope, even in the darkest moments. She couldn't let her marriage troubles change that fundamental truth about who she was, the truth about the past that evening. Amelia made a decision that would change everything. Instead of avoiding Vincent when he returned from work, she was waiting for him in the living room. She had prepared a simple dinner and opened a bottle of sparkling cider, a small celebration of the life growing inside her. Vincent seemed surprised to find her there, even more surprised by the intimate setting she had created. He hesitated in the doorway, clearly unsure how to react to this departure from their recent pattern of polite avoidance. Amelia asked him to sit down, her voice calm but determined. She had something important to tell him, she said. Something that might help him understand why she had agreed to their contract and why this pregnancy meant more to her than he might realize. She began to tell him about her childhood, about the father who had abandoned them when she was 12 and Tommy was 7. Their mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, but the stress had taken its toll. When their mother died of a heart attack during Amelia's first year of medical school, she had become Tommy's guardian, his only family. Vincent listened, without interruption, as she explained how she had sacrificed her own dreams of specializing in pediatric surgery to focus on the more lucrative field of cardiac surgery. Every choice she had made for the past decade had been about providing for Tommy, about making sure he never felt abandoned the way she had when their father left. The contract with Vincent, she continued, had seemed like the perfect solution. A way to save Tommy without compromising her principles about love and marriage. She had never intended for real feelings to develop, had never imagined that their fake relationship would become something that mattered to her. When she finished speaking, Vincent was quiet for a long time. Then unexpectedly he began to talk about his own past. His words came slowly at first, as if he were unused to sharing such personal details. Vincent's hidden wounds. Vincent told her about his father, a man who had built the Sterling empire through ruthless business practices and emotional coldness. His father had viewed Vincent not as a son to be loved, but as an heir to be molded. Affection was weakness, his father had taught him. Love was a luxury that successful men couldn't afford. His mother had been different, warm and loving, but she had died when Vincent was 16. A car accident that had left him alone with a father who blamed him for distracting her from her driving. The guilt had eaten away at Vincent for years, convincing him that caring about people only led to pain and loss. He had learned to protect himself by never getting too close to anyone. The women he dated were kept at arm's length, relationships that were pleasant but superficial. He had convinced himself that he was content with this arrangement, that he didn't need the messy complications of real love. But then Amelia had entered his life, and everything had changed. The night they had made love, he had felt something he had thought was impossible for him. For those few hours, the walls he had built around his heart had crumbled completely. The experience had terrified him so much that he had fled, hiding behind the cold language of their contract, because he didn't know how to handle the intensity of his feelings. The pregnancy announcement had shaken him even more. The thought of being responsible for another life, of potentially failing a child the way his father had failed him, was overwhelming. He was afraid that he would damage their child the way he had been damaged, that his emotional distance would create a generation of pain. The hospital emergency. As Vincent finished speaking, Amelia felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was just the stress of their conversation, but the pain intensified quickly. She doubled over, gasping, and Vincent was immediately at her side. He helped her to the couch, his face pale with worry. When she told him she thought something was wrong with the pregnancy, he didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he had called for his driver and was helping her down to the car, his usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. The ride to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and Vincent's voice on the phone, demanding that the best doctors be waiting for them. He held her hand the entire time, his thumb stroking her palm in a gesture of comfort that was purely instinctive. At the hospital, Amelia was rushed into the emergency room, while Vincent paced the waiting area, like a caged animal. The irony was not lost on her that she was now a patient in the same hospital where she had performed countless surgeries. Trusting others to care for her and the life she carried, Dr. Patricia Wells took charge of her case personally, running tests and monitoring both Amelia and the baby. The hours stretched endlessly as they waited for results. Vincent refused to leave, even when the nurses suggested he go home and rest. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed, holding her hand and speaking in low, soothing tones. It was during those long hours of uncertainty that the last barriers between them finally fell. Vincent spoke about his fears of fatherhood, about his terror of repeating his own father's mistakes. Amelia shared her dreams for their child, her hopes that they could create the loving family that both of them had missed in their own childhoods. When Dr. Wells finally returned with the test results, she brought good news. The pain had been caused by round ligament stretching, a normal part of pregnancy that had been exacerbated by stress. Both Amelia and the baby were healthy, but she would need to take things easier for the remainder of her pregnancy. The moment of truth, as they prepared to leave the hospital the next morning, Vincent stopped in the middle of the corridor. He took both of Amelia's hands in his and looked directly into her eyes. His voice was steady, but full of emotion as he spoke. He told her that he loved her. Not because of their contract, not because of the baby, but because she had shown him what it meant to be truly alive. She had brought light into his carefully controlled world and taught him that taking risks with his heart was worth the potential pain. The contract they had signed was meaningless now, he continued. He wanted to start over, to build something real together. If she would have him, not as a business partner, but as a husband who loved her completely, he would spend the rest of his life proving that he was worthy of her trust. Amelia felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to his words. This was the man she had glimpsed beneath the cold exterior. The man she had fallen in love with, despite all her efforts to protect her heart. She told him yes, that she loved him too, that she wanted nothing more than to build a real marriage and family with him. Their kiss in that hospital hallway was witnessed by a handful of early shift nurses and a janitor pushing a cart, but Amelia and Vincent, they were the only two people in the world. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, not written in legal language but carved into their hearts. 6 months later, Tommy's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone had dared to hope, and he was now in complete remission. He had returned to his art with renewed passion, creating paintings that celebrated life and love and second chances. Amelia had transitioned to part-time surgery, focusing on cases that truly needed her expertise. While preparing for motherhood, Vincent had restructured his business to allow for more flexibility. He was determined to be present for his wife and child in ways his own father never had been. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, arriving 2 weeks early as if she were eager to meet the parents who already loved her so deeply. They named her Hope, a testament to the journey that had brought them together and the future they were building as a family, the new contract one. Year after Amelia had first walked into Vincent's office, they stood together in the same space where their arrangement had begun. But this time, they weren't signing a business contract. They were renewing their wedding vows, speaking words of love and commitment that came from their hearts rather than from legal documents. The ceremony was small and intimate, attended only by Tommy, Dr. Wells, and a few close friends. Vincent's original contract lay forgotten in a file drawer, replaced by promises that no lawyer had written and no expiration date could touch. As they exchanged rings, Amelia thought about the desperate woman who had made a deal with a cold businessman just to save her brother's life. A woman could never have imagined that her sacrifice would lead to such joy, that a fake marriage would become the most real thing in her life. Vincent's vows were simple but profound. He promised to love her, not for a specified term, but for all the days of his life. Promised to be the father their children deserved, and the husband she had never dared to dream of having when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Again, their kiss was met with applause and tears from their small gathering of loved ones. But more importantly, it was witnessed by baby Hope, sleeping peacefully in Tommy's arms. A living symbol of the love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. The real ending later that evening. Yes. They sat in their living room with Hope sleeping between them. Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The penthouse that had once felt like a cold museum now felt like home. It's filled with laughter and love and the promise of tomorrow. Vincent reached over to take her hand, and she marveled at how natural the gesture had become. His touch no longer carried the careful distance of their early days together. Now it spoke of intimacy and partnership and a love that had been tested by uncertainty and had emerged stronger than ever. Their contract marriage had ended, but their real marriage was just beginning. They had learned that love couldn't be negotiated or scheduled or contained within legal boundaries. It grew in its own time, in its own way, transforming everything it touched, as Hope stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that never failed. To melt their hearts, Amelia and Vincent knew that their greatest adventure was still ahead of them. They would face it together, not as business partners bound by a contract, but as two people who had found in each other the love they had never believed possible.